This is true for Dane County, but this is a statewide slide. I'm getting an echo, but Wisconsin is red here for the Badgers, and we used to build more than the rest of the country on a per capita basis, but in the last 15 years, we've built less, right? So that's part of the story, which is we have a cumulative supply deficit in Dane County and the state. Even though we're building a lot, we're not building enough to keep up with our population growth. Right. And so another way to think about the housing shortage is the ratio of jobs to housing units. Research tells us we want this to be about 1.2. That creates a balanced market. And there you see that Dane County is well above that. Right. And so are the other job center counties in this state. So Waukesha, Brown and Outagamie, which is Green Bay, Appleton, and then La Crosse and Eau Claire. So we are growing jobs as a state and as a region, which is good. We're growing households, which is good. Even though we're old and a little slower than the rest of the nation, we're building housing just not fast enough to keep up with the demand. So that leads to the price pressures and the affordability challenges, right? For Dane County, the median price of a home for purchase has gone up $112,000 in the last 3 years. And raise your hand if your income has gone up $112,000 in the last 3 years. Not me. Right? So again, this is in some ways driven by the structural undersupply of units relative to demand, but it's also in some ways reflects the particular funculations in the housing market from COVID because of the cost of construction going way up. Right? So in the regional housing study, the median sales price they have for Middleton is the highest of any community in Dane County, which is about $550,000. That's a lot of money, right? And so then you could think about to acquire that, you would need about $150,000 to $170,000, depending on the mortgage product you can get, right? So one other way to think about it, this is my slide. It's not as cool as the ones the consultants make. The blue line is the ratio in Dane County and Madison metropolitan area between median house price and median household income. So if you think about this, this is the measure of housing affordability at the middle of the market. Whether the median income house can afford the median priced home. You want this ratio to be about 3.33. So we'll talk later about the 30% of income rule. 1 over 30% is 3.33. Madison Metro used to be affordable up until about 2006. And now we're well over 5 on a score that should be 3. Right? And the primary driver is the orange line, which is single-family building permits per 1,000 of population. We used to build a lot, and housing was more affordable. Then for the last 16 years, we've stopped building much of anything in per capita terms, and prices have gone high. Right? So this is true everywhere in the state, but it's particularly severe in our metro region. All right, so if you want, here's the current rents. I actually got these in late November, so they might be a little out of date. But if you go onto these national websites and look by bedroom size, the average 2-bedroom in Dane County is about $1,700. And that includes new build and existing housing. Obviously, new build is going to be much more pricey, both in terms of the overall price because of the size and amenities of newer housing, but also on a per square foot basis, right? So, and we were joking earlier, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a good data table is worth 1,000 pictures. So the blue line is the apartment vacancy rate in Dane County. The lighter line is the raw monthly data, and I've inserted the trend line here. And you can see that for the last 4 years, we've been well below that average 5%. We really do see both qualitatively in the data and quantitatively in research that when vacancies are above 5%, rent growth goes negative and tenants have more choice. When vacancies are well below 5%, the opposite is true. Landlords have more pricing power and rent growth accelerates. And you can see that in the orange line, which is month over month rent growth in the Madison area, right? And back in mid 2022, when all the national media said, oh, the Madison market has the highest rate of rent growth of any metro in the country. That's why I started preparing this slide, because we also had the lowest vacancy rate, right? So this is the key, I think, to helping explain to our constituents about the continued demand for housing. That even though we're building a lot of housing, it's all occupied. And in fact, the vacancy rates go down. Because if you take the long-term trend line of both of these data points, vacancies are going down and rent growth is accelerating. If you want a metaphor, it's I'm driving 70 on the highway. My buddy is a mile in front of me. He's driving 70. Even if I accelerate to 75 and he accelerates to 80, I'm accelerating, but I'm falling further behind. And that's really what's happening in our housing market. This is from the regional housing study. These are legally restricted affordable housing. These would be any sort of housing units that have an affordability primarily driven either by the HUD and Dane County Housing Authority programs and or the WIDA tax credit program. There you can see that Middleton has about 730 legally restricted affordable housing units, which is still small relative to our supply. And in the last 12 years, Middleton has constructed 459 of those. I would point you to the work we did on the Workforce Housing Committee back in 2015, where we made a goal of building 425. And we have met that goal. So, but I have a slide later to tell you that we've met our goal and fallen further behind. Right? This is another way to think about the housing squeeze in Dane County, which is the blue is the number of renter households, and the green is the number of units that are available and priced at the point that would be affordable to those households. So we have a real shortage of units at the high end that accommodate the demand for upper income households, which generally means that they occupy the next available unit. Some people call that renting down. I don't like that term. But you understand what that means, that someone comes into the region with high income and don't necessarily want to or be able to find a high-priced, high-amenity unit that they want, so they take the next available one. In the same way, on the lower end of the wage scale, there's just a real dearth of any units affordable to the lowest income households, so they are all trying to compete for the same shortage of units priced at the middle of the market. That's what I call the big squeeze. Okay, and so here is your takeaway point for the city of Middleton. One way to think about, at least when we did the housing strategy report in 2015, one way to think about what would be a target or a affordability target for the city was we looked at households that make less than half of the area median income and pay more than 50% of their income in rent, right? So these would be people who live in Middleton, work in Middleton or in Madison, are earning money in the labor force, right? So 50% of area median income could be two minimum wage workers or even someone earning up to $25 an hour in a production-oriented job, but paying more than half of your income on rent doesn't leave much left over for food, transportation, clothing, and educational expenses, right? This used to be for Middleton, 360 households, renting households, and now in the most recent data, 515. So Abby hasn't seen this data yet because it reasonably just came out. I haven't updated the slides. This used to be 425 in the middle of the decade. That's where we came up with our goal. It's now 515, right? So this is the story. We're building lots of housing. We're building lots of affordable housing, which is good, but it's not keeping up with the growth and the demand for overall households and for lower income households that need support. So in the next 30 years, the county is projected to need, you ready for the drum roll, 116,000 new housing units or 100,000 net new housing units, right? 16,000 will probably go away just as they age out of the stock. And so for Middleton, you see that number is about 4,000 housing units. So this is where all of your jaws drop because we have a huge shortage and jobs are growing, population is growing, so that shortage will continue to increase over time. Okay, so what's the solution? One of the solutions is to build a lot of new stuff, even though it's expensive, right? As anything you build, new housing in a tight housing market creates what we call a chain of moves. right? So if you build a new senior housing unit, a baby boomer will vacate their large single-family house. A younger family will move in, they vacate a starter home, and then the family that moves in there will vacate rental. So you create this chain of moves as you relax housing supply constraints. Even if you're building new market rate housing, it helps to alleviate the price pressure in the middle of the market. Except it's really hard to build anything new right now because banks have really tightened up standards for lending, right? We always talk about if you want to build a new housing unit, you need the 4 L's. You need lending, you need lumber or materials, you need labor, right? And then we talk about you need legal authority to build, which is the zoning and subdivision regulations. Okay, building anything new is 36% more expensive. Hence, existing stuff is also 36% more expensive. If you ever looked at your insurance bill from your homeowner's insurance, you'll see, why am I paying more? Your premium went up even if your rate did not. And that's because it's just going to cost more to replace the house that you have because construction costs are up. Multifamily construction costs are up 38% in the last 3 years. So it's just very expensive to build anything new. And that also means that the pipeline of new construction is actually a lot less than where we need it to be in the state. And we don't have the workers. So we're facing a lot of structural headwinds in our housing market. One way to help you think about policies and strategies as a city is to just look at recently constructed programs. And I just pulled this off a State Journal website, so I'm not taking any private data that I have. It costs about, for a multifamily unit in Dane County, it's about $340,000 total development cost. That's land, labor, lumber, and everything. And as you all know, I like to use a trick question as a professor. Because it costs $340,000 to build a new unit of market rate housing, how much does it cost to build a new unit of subsidized affordable housing? And the answer is the same, $340,000. And there you can see that the City of Madison subsidies amount to about $38,000 per unit. That's about what you need to make a low-income housing tax credit development cash flow in terms of city subsidy. That's largely through their Affordable Housing Development Fund, which could also include TIF and county. And then I think this is my final slide, just to give you a sense of how apartments work, simply because in the public dialogue, I hear a lot of misperception as to what drives the cost of rental housing. So for every $1 of rent you pay in Wisconsin, which includes Dane County, about 46 cents on the dollar goes to the mortgage and the loan, right? Which is going to be an increasing percent because interest rates are higher. About 31% is operating costs. There's very little any of us can do about that because you need utilities and repairs and maintenance and administration, right? So that even if I won the lottery and I built affordable housing and donated it to a nonprofit for free, you're still looking at $500 per unit just in operating costs, right? Then you add in property taxes and the like, and you have about an average 9% rate of return on profit. So the biggest chunk that we have anything to control is actually on the debt side, on the mortgage side. And I know that we've done a number of low-income housing tax credit developments here. And so I give you this slide to show this is the main reason why the low-income housing tax credit works, is that an infusion of equity into a deal substantially lowers the amount of debt required for a property, and therefore, in exchange for that financing, much discounted rents that are affordable. And there's very little that you have control over on this capital and financing stack of apartments. So I think I'll end it there. That's, this is my slide of good news. I guess it got left off. But that gives you a little flavor of some of the structural challenges we have in our housing market. I don't know how many questions or discussion points.
Just kind of a comment and question, because this has come up recently about, I don't know if we want to get into this now, but about a cost for a builder and some of the new zoning that Middleton's doing, particularly bird glass is one that has come up. I don't know if you guys got those emails, but I've gotten emails about, more expensive materials and weighing that against
Yeah.
affordable
I'm,
housing.
I'm aware of the issue, right?
Yeah.
And let me speak generally about that. That there's always a trade-off between higher quality design, which generally costs more in a building. And we know that when municipalities around the state adopt additional aesthetic requirements such as finish levels or additional community space, all of this drives the cost that a developer will face. But I don't have an exact estimate of what's the cost per unit of bird glass versus normal glass. I will say that we do know that there are some costs that are much more within the purview of local governments that are much more impactful in terms of the actual price per square foot of a unit or a rent. And that's largely the parking requirements, because an underground parking stall is about 50,000 per unit, per stall, right? The time delay involved in construction is often quite expensive in terms of the holding costs and the interest rate costs. And so, at a certain level, anything that drives up costs is going to reduce housing affordability. In the same way that I know that there's a concern about impact fees, right? If the impact fees are 6,000 to 10,000 per unit, that gets passed along either in higher rent or higher sales cost. What I don't have the exact data for is at the margin, how much bird safe glass is going to add to the cost of.
And that, I mean, that's just the specific example, but I mean, any other.
Well, the other example that comes up a lot is environmental features, right? Because upfront investment in environmental sustainability is more expensive upfront, but in the long term, if it reduces operating costs, it might have a payback period.
Right.
The difficulty is as to who ultimately should bear that burden, the tenant, the developer, or the city. And that's where there's a lot of discussion.
Right.
Anybody else? No, go ahead. Oh, Alder
My question is, you mentioned 4,000 units. Is that Dane County that's needed, or is that just in Middleton? And when
No,
you say-
in that slide
Okay,
that showed 116,000 new units countywide.
okay.
If you look at the ones that are allocated to Middleton, it's about 4,000.
And is
And,
that?
and I'm just reading off the slide. The
Okay.
actual data table that would show that exact number has not been finalized yet.
Okay.
Um,
Now, is that unit mixed, like houses, apartments?
total units,
Total units, okay.
right? There's a further breakdown in the regional housing strategy that would give a suggested breakdown between unit type, single family, multifamily,
Okay.
ownership, rental. Because, having been on plan commission for many years, the challenge, of course, is availability of land for new neighborhoods that would have substantial detached, single family under current arrangement.
Okay.
But I think the future allocation is assuming about 50%. I want to go back and check that. What percent of the future units would be single family?
Okay.
And of course, single family can mean attached townhouses, smaller houses on smaller lots, not just a 10,000 square foot lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I'll get my mic up here. Okay. I have a couple questions. On the last point, about availability of land, could the fact that Middleton is, basically we've built up what's available to build on, and now we've got to, if we want to have new single family housing, really what's left is our growth areas into farmland. So could that be part of what's driving a lack of housing in this city in particular?
Well, there's multiple interacting effects that are driving the supply shortage, particularly of single family detached in Dane County, right? Part of it is just right now the market is hard because interest rates are high. But in the long run, it has been land availability and land price and the availability of labor to build those, right? So if the cumulative reinforcing effect is that even a smaller house on a smaller lot, say the type in Red Tail
Ridge.
I can never remember the names, even though I was on Plan Commission all these years, like Misty Ridge, Middleton Valley. I mean, they all sound the same, right? Even those are going to price probably well above 450 a unit just because of land costs and construction costs. So that's part of what's been driving it. But I mean, the long-term solution is smaller houses on smaller lots, a greater kind of attached missing middle product. But the trade-off then that we dealt with a lot in the comp plan, as you know, is that would be the growth area at north and west. But if it's not served by public transit, then you're just exacerbating a road crisis anyway. So, you can never look just at one component. It's how they all work together. And I know it's been our strategy for 15 years to try to do infill development and redevelopment, particularly along arterials and corridors where there's transit available.
Okay.
But I mean, yes, the growth area and the comp plan, we did have a table that's tried to show that the growth area would be able to accommodate our projected growth at reasonable densities, which is what is required in the state planning law. On the other hand, if between us, Wanakee, West Madison, DeForest, Windsor, I'm going to get myself in trouble, but if we could zone enough land and developers could build houses at $250,000, they could sell 10,000 of them yesterday. Right? So that's kind of the challenge we face.
Okay, and I have one quick question. You're familiar with Madison's housing snapshot that they do?
Yes.
Would you recommend that Middleton do something like that? I think Madison does it every year, but maybe we could be a little less ambitious and do it every couple of years?
Sure. It's generally good, but I'm also very familiar with the staff that work on that, and it's a substantial lift of staff time and committee work. So that would be a trade-off.
Oh, thanks.
Abby's smiling. She's like, we know who would have to be writing that report. Right, but I would suggest it might be time to update the workforce housing strategy document that was last written in 2015. And last time you got a free consultant on that, so he may be available again.
Well, and there is an opening on the Workforce Housing Committee. I'll just put that out there.
Right. Alden Lorman, did you have questions?
So, playing the devil's advocate for developers that we hear from. So why not just lower our standards and why don't we just build really cheap houses and buildings and places to live? So what's the downside of doing that? Why don't we just lower our standards, and
Well-
not go with bird safe glass and energy efficiency and all that good stuff and just,
There's a minimum floor below which you're not allowed to lower your standards because
but no, go right to the bottom.
state,
What if we just go right to the bottom?
even if you built right to the exact state uniform dwelling code and uniform construction code, your costs to build a unit of multifamily, you might have smaller units and lower levels of finish, but you're still only down to like 320 a unit, not 340 a unit, right? So even if you built a, one bedroom that was 500 square feet rather than 730 square feet, you're not going to eliminate elevators. You're not going to eliminate sprinklers. And so what happens is, as a society, we've raised the general quality standards. We think that units should have heat and electricity and running water, right? Which 100 years ago they didn't. And then there's occupancy standards because we don't want to put 6 people in a room. But what happens is that on the margin, low-income folks either overcrowd or live, right? We know where people live who work in Middleton. They live in Janesville or Sauk or Beaver Dam and drive, right? So it's not really developers trying to raise their standards as much as it is that if the process is long and the holding cost is high and the land costs are high and construction costs are high, so you're already targeting a higher end of the market, you're going to put in an extra 15,000 per unit for a higher level of FF&E finishings, and equipment to attract a more higher end clientele. So even when nonprofits try to value engineer a unit for affordable, your total development costs are still well over 300,000 per unit for multifamily, right? And even higher when you're talking single family, just because of the building codes. So, yeah. I mean, we could eliminate indoor plumbing and heat and electricity, but I don't think anyone wants to go there,
Well, yeah.
right? So,
And so my, my point to just bluntly putting that out there is, what we keep getting peppered with is, well, these things that we're obviously writing into our ordinances and codes to build better buildings, more efficient buildings, more environmentally friendly buildings, being a better steward of our society. It just seems like then it's kind of a baseless or blind statement on their part to say, oh, no, you're just making these unaffordable. Well, I mean, it sounds like then it's not. I mean, we might as well always strive to build and make sure we have standards that
well,
build longevity and efficiency and environmental
I-
thought into it, as opposed
I would-
to just stripping those little bits out and saying,
Yeah.
okay, we're building it a little bit
I
cheaper.
would put it differently though, and say that every regulation has a cost and a benefit to different people, right? And so imposing all those burdens on developers when they're trying to meet a market and deliver a product at a price point people can afford does actually matter, because a lot of those costs do get passed on. And then the units that are built rent for over $2,000 a month, or they're not built and then we have a cumulative supply shortage. So I wouldn't say that it's an easy answer either way. You have to look at it both cumulatively and at the margin, right? I mean, there's a lot of communities that are wrestling with the issue of whether to exempt subsidized housing from like park impact fees. Well, $5,000 per unit is a lot of money, and that translates into a lot of rent. On the other hand, people need parks and recreation, right? I mean, one thing the cities can do is if you work with a nonprofit and they build affordable housing, right, it's exempt from the property taxes, which is about $300 to $500 per unit per month, which really makes the building cash flow and lowers the rent. And then Bill is going to have a heart attack, right? As is Brian, because you're bringing people in, you need services. You need to generate property tax revenue for schools and police and fire and EMS, right? So you could eliminate all the property taxes on a building, make it really affordable, but there's always a trade-off. So that's a long-winded academic answer to say, you always have to think about who should bear that cost and how we think about those trade-offs.
Oh, well, I appreciate the long-winded academic answer, because I mean, that's the reality. That's what people need to hear. And sort of almost kind of pull their head out of the sand at times and, and realize that we can't have it all. So, if we want to have standards, there's just going to be costs associated with it. If we want to do the right thing as we see it.
Which is why for many years, city TIF policy was to kind of provide additional financial incentives for that higher level of environmental performance in a building. Right? Because oftentimes what you can't accomplish by regulation, you can accomplish by financial incentive.
Thanks.
Brian, did you have a question?
Brian wanted to cut us off.
I know. Just a quick question.
Monitoring the clock.
Just a clarification on the 4,000 number specific to Middleton. In the regional housing study, whether it's 4,000 for Middleton or the other communities identified, is that number a mathematical exercise? Meaning, is there or
Yes.
okay, so it's just based on population and projected growth. There's no analysis of what a community's growth boundaries are and all those other things, how feasible that number is.
Right. It'd be the same way that you would do a population forecast for a comprehensive plan. So that number starts with CARPC's overall growth forecast and then allocates it down by percentage to municipalities. Right. And so, but then you would also say if Middleton or Pittsburgh says we don't or we can't that many units, it's not like those units disappear. We don't have strong regional planning that said, well, then they have to go to Wanakee or Verona. Right. And so that's what the regional housing strategy is supposed to be about, which is we all agree on these numbers. We all have big numbers to hit. But then it becomes a secondary question of where and how. Given other issues, transportation, need to work within our growth boundaries, relationships with neighbors, but I'm not on plan commission, so I don't have to answer that question anymore.
Does anyone else have any? All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. That was
Good to see-
very informative. Thank you.
So this is a good segue for us for our next topic. I'll pull up the slides here. Bill's going to give us a rundown of the TID number 3 and TID number 5, but then that'll lead into our continued conversation on what to do about TID number 3 as we get closer to the end of its life.
Great. Could I have
Brian, I can
60,
share if that works.
could I have 60 seconds to just let everybody take care of their
Garbage.
disposables? I'm not sure where you want everything, Brian.
My screen.
Thank you.
Otherwise, there's a box back there. You can put it in the.
Yeah, we can do a recycling box and a garbage.
Perfect.
I'll just put it there.
Grab food, actually. Grab more food before I toss her.
Yeah. I want to have like 3 more plates. It's so good. People. I love lunch. Oh my God. I could just eat it all day. Yeah. It's my night. Several years ago, actually. I'm sorry. I'm right in your way.
Oh, thank you. Mhm.
Great meeting, by the way. Good agenda.
No, it is. It's up there. Yeah, no. No, it's all good.
Okay. Gotta keep you informed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Next item on our discussion list is an update on tax increment financing districts number 3 and number 5, and discussion on potential TID 3 closure and affordable housing extension timeline. Take it away,
Okay,
Bill.
thank you. Yeah, I'll give an update on the city's 2 TIF districts, TID 3 and TID 5. I'll try to keep the financial update a little more brief this time so that we can have more time to focus on the upcoming potential for closing TID 3 and the affordable housing extension relating to the presentation we just heard. Starting with an overview of TIF in Middleton. As you know, Middleton has 2 TIF districts, TID number 3. TIF 3 is located in the downtown business park and south of the Greenway area. That TIF has been in place since 1993. It did receive 1 legislative extension. It's required to terminate with that extension by 2030. And it is one of the most, if not the most successful in terms of new value TIDs in the state of Wisconsin. I just took a look this morning, and at its current value at just under 650 million, it is the largest TIF district in the state in terms of value created. And that is after 5 subtractions that have subtracted 470 million in value from the TID. Looking at that, if you took just that 470 million that's already been subtracted, that together would be the 5th largest TIF in the state.
Wow.
Combined, we've added over $1 billion of value. And if you think about the areas included, it's had a tremendous impact on the development in Middleton. So it's a very powerful tool. It's been a very successful tool for Middleton. Our TIF district number 5 was created in 2009. That has a required termination by 2036. Given the timing of when that TID was created, it was right around when there was the recession starting. It got off to a bit of a slower start. But the last few years, we've really seen development and value growth take off in that TIF district. And that is now in the top 20 of TIDs in the state in terms of value, with a value increment of 230 million. I've included a couple maps in the presentation. Looking at TID 3, there are a lot of open areas, and that's from the various subtractions that over the years, as projects have been completed and paid off, those areas have been subtracted. So the areas that are in the blue color remain in the TID. They have to be contiguous, which is why the shape kind of meanders in certain areas, but you also see a lot of sections that have been removed from the TID over its life. TIF District number 5, primarily located in between Highway 12 and Parmenter. To keep the contiguity requirement, there is some extension through public land and Greenway and the Creek Corridor. And then it also picks up Century Avenue, a portion of Century Avenue, Allen Boulevard, and was amended a couple of years ago to include a portion of University Avenue. Looking at TID 3, we are nearing the end of TIF 3. The expenditure period goes through 2025, which means that we cannot incur new project costs after September of 2025. And then the state gives you up to an additional 5-year period to be collecting increment and pay off obligations. We are expecting about $75 million of new development to occur over the next 3 years within that TID. We've been able to capitalize on the success of that TIF district to advance some money from other funds, including the golf course and to TIF 5. All of those advances are scheduled to be repaid in either 2025 or 2026. There is an open question about whether or not there would be a donation of any excess increment from that TID. And right now in our project plan, it includes a placeholder of 8.7 million that could be donated. There are no specific plans at this time to make that donation, so it's one of the items we'll be discussing as we near the end of the TID. And we have one more amendment legally available, although at this point we don't have a specific amendment that we're recommending. This is just a snapshot of the full financial model. I know you can't see the individual numbers. I just want to let you know this is the model that we prepare each year. If there are specific questions, I can bring up a bigger version of this and we can look at any of the specifics. Looking at a couple of the key items coming up in the remaining life of this TID, the major project costs are the completion of Pleasant View Road, approximately $5 million of additional costs that will be incurred this year. The reconstruction of Parmenter Street from Century North to an urban section, that's estimated about $4.6 million. And then we do have a placeholder of $5 million in each year in 2024 and 2025 for other TIF projects. At one point, there was discussion that if there was redevelopment of a community campus plan, perhaps there could be a cost related to streetscaping or parking or other costs that could be borne by the TID. Depending on where that project's at, I'm not sure if those costs are going to be incurred within the life of the TID, but that's just still there as a placeholder. I will say if we are going to take on any new major projects for the TID, that's something we likely need to be planning for this year so that we have time to construct those and complete them by the required closure in 2025. This is just a blow up of one section of that full financial summary, and this looks at the annual and cumulative fund balance of the TIF district. So at the end of 2023, we had a fund balance of about 24 million in the TID. Of that, just over 5 million was advanced to TID number 5 and to the golf course, showing an available fund of 19 million. The remaining obligations column represents outstanding development agreements that we have. So places where there's been construction, we have a TIF agreement and a TIF bond, and we have payments planned out through the remaining life of the TIF district. So at this point, we do not have enough cash on hand to pay off all those obligations. However, if we look forward a couple of years, by 2025, we are projecting that we will have more in available funds than those remaining obligations. And that's what gives us the potential to be discussing closing TID 3 early, potentially in 2025 or likely at least by 2026, that we'd be in a position that we'd be at the end of the expenditure period, so we can't take on any new costs, and we're projected to have enough money on hand in that TID that we could pay off those remaining obligations and close the TID early, somewhere around 2026. If we go over to TIF district number 5, this has an expenditure period going through 2031 and required closure by 2036. There is significant amount of new development occurring in TID 5, and one of the large projects that's just getting started is the Bell Farm development. We've got a total of over $100 million of development projected in the model between 2025 and 2030. We have a placeholder for development on the Meritor site. Meritor owns land in the city of Middleton along the Beltline. There's been discussions of development. We don't have any specific plans at this point, but we still have that as a placeholder in the model. Various smaller projects that are included. One thing that we have not built into the model at this point is the redevelopment of the Bruce Company site. It's certainly something that we're been very involved with, but at this point, there are just a lot of questions on what the total value would be and what the timeline is and what that's going to look like. So for purposes of this model, it's not included, but that is something that we can add in as we get more specifics. Looking at the upcoming costs for TID 5, a couple of the projects that we have in 2024 are land acquisition for the Century Avenue Bridge, streetscaping improvements for an urban updated section along Lisa Lane, looking at undergrounding utilities along University Avenue in 2025, and then development of the President Branch Creek Trailhead at Century Avenue and the Century Avenue Bridge in 2027 in conjunction with a Dane County project for that bridge. If we look at the debt service and fund balance for TIF 5, unlike TID 3, which has no external debt, all of the TID 3 external debt payments have been paid off at this point. With TID 5, we do have outstanding debt, and that is scheduled to be paid through 2035. We also have developer obligations in TID 5 as we do in TID 3. And when we look at the fund balance in TID 5, at the end of 2023, we had a negative fund balance of $2 million. And that represents money that the city has invested in projects or in infrastructure, but we have not received enough cash back. And that's part of why we have these advances from TIF 3 to TIF 5 to provide a loan between the two TIF districts to cover those costs. We are projecting that by 2026, TID 5 will be in a position to fully repay that loan to TID 3, allowing TID 3 to close. And then we would continue to make those debt service payments and showing that we're building up the available fund balance within TID 5 as well. Unless maybe I'll just pause there. Are there any questions about the TIF financials before I get into the main topics?
Anybody? I have a
Yeah.
couple quick questions. On page 41 of the present on the packet, the debt service for and fund balance for TID 3. You were talking about the discussion we could have about closing the TID early at 2025. Is that something that's sort of subjective that we can pick any year before 2030, or do we have to choose 2025 or wait till 2030?
You can do it anytime between those periods. There is a certain window that the state has that if you send it to the process to close the TID early is there needs to be a resolution passed by the city council indicating that we are closing the TID. We need to show that all of the obligations have been paid. And then that is sent into the state. And based on the timing of when that resolution is received by the state determines when the TID closes and what the final year of increment is. So the earliest likely that we could take action would be in 2025. I think based on the timing of those resolutions, 2026 may end up being a more practical date, but it could be in any year after that up to 2030.
Great. And I don't know if we'll discuss later the advantage of closing it early versus not. We'll do that
Yep,
later.
I will touch on that later in the presentation.
And I had another question about what you said that in TID 5 in the updates and assumptions that the Bruce Company is not included in the TID right now. Does that happen often that projects just get added in to the map because of the project, or is the area determined first? I mean, I'm assuming the area is determined first and then.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the Bruce Company site and the area that would be developed is physically located within the boundaries of the TIF. just for purposes of the financial model and projections, where we're projecting how much new development is going to occur in which years, how much is that going to pay in taxes, and what are the costs related to that development. That's what's not built into the financial model yet, just because there are so many variables. The assumption with development projects is typically that the development is going to generate enough new increment to at least pay for the costs associated with that development. We usually want to have some additional increment that pays for other district-wide costs. We've done various projections for the Bruce Company development, but at this point, things are enough in flux that we haven't added it to the financial model yet. And it is typical that as projects are at their concept stage, they may not be in the model. And then as numbers get more refined and we get closer to a TIF agreement, then we will add that into the model as well.
Perfect, thanks.
I have a question about the TID policies. How often are those reviewed and updated, and who does that?
So TIF policy is, I'd say, reviewed regularly by the staff. And as there are items where we would recommend changes, we'd bring those forward to the Finance Committee and Council to review and make adjustments to that. I don't remember off the top of my head the last time the TIF policy was amended, but I know there was a fairly recent amendment related to the definition of green roofs as a eligible TIF cost to more narrow in the definition. And that came in response to questions that we were getting as we had TIF projects and were reviewing eligible costs, and felt that it would be helpful to have a more specific definition included within that policy.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any questions? I have another. And how often do you have to report to the state so that they know that we're following their regulations? Do you do a yearly report to them?
Yeah, we are required to do an annual report that is sent to the state. We are also required to annually hold a joint review board meeting with the other taxing jurisdictions. And part of that meeting is a presentation of the report. And we typically will do both the financial report that goes to the state, as well as a more general update on projects going on within the TID, and we talk about the TIF financial models.
Cool. All right. My last question before I let you move on. How soon will taxpayers feel the?
I will be touching on that too as I talk about the TIF
Okay,
closure.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So next, I'd like to talk about the affordable housing extension. And this is an item that is allowed under state law that as a TIF district nears the end of its life, there is the ability that the city or municipality can extend the life of that TIF district by one additional year, essentially collect one additional year of tax increment, and that money can be used for housing improvements within the city as a whole, not just within the area of the TIF district. So with that additional affordable housing extension, you would collect that additional year of increment. At least 75% of that additional increment you collect needs to be used for affordable housing as defined by the state. And their definition is housing that costs no more than 30% of a household's gross income. The remaining 25% of that additional increment needs to be used for housing improvements, but that can be used for housing improvements of any type. It's not restricted to affordable. And unlike most TIF project costs, which need to be incurred within the TIF district or within a certain distance of the boundary of the TID, these funds can be used throughout the entire city. It is available for any tax increment district. The approval is just a municipal resolution. So unlike most amendments to a TIF district, those have to go through a joint review board and get approval from the other taxing jurisdictions. The city itself, the governing body of the council, can approve a resolution for the affordable housing extension. There needs to be documentation to the state that all of the project costs within the TIF have been paid off already. So as we get near that point, we show everything is paid off or we have funds on hand to cover that, and then you can approve this extension. The state has some frequently asked questions. I thought might be helpful to just go through some of the highlights here. A couple of these I just touched on, the first two. At least 75% has to be used for affordable housing. That's defined by the state definition of 30% of gross monthly income. The funds do not need to be used within that 1 year period. They do say that, however, the funds need to be removed from the TIF district. So what I think municipalities that have gone through this will typically do is they will collect that additional increment. They will move it out of the TIF district and set up a new fund, such as a special revenue housing project. And that lets them go ahead and close the TIF district. And so then those are generated by the TIF, but they're not TIF funds any longer. There's new affordable housing fund that then is available to be spent over multiple years. Next question, does the state have a list of eligible affordable housing costs? And the answer to that is no, that each municipality should identify their needs and develop a plan. And there's a lot of flexibility in the state law with leaving it up to municipalities to determine how to best spend those affordable housing funds. And then the next question they had is, are there some examples? And some of the ones they mention are municipalities have set up revolving loan funds or grant programs to increase home ownership or improve affordable housing. So you could have loans available that would be paid back. You could have low interest loans. You could also provide direct grants. You could provide subsidies to housing projects. So again, there's a lot of flexibility, and I think some good examples from around the state of different ways that funds can be used. The state does say that the municipality should have a plan for how the funds are going to be used as part of that resolution. I don't think it needs to be completely defined and spelled out, but I think there should be a general sense of these are the types of things that would be funded by that extra year of increment. I'll go through the slides on TID 3 closure because a lot of this does tie in with the affordable housing, and then again, be happy to take any questions on either of these topics. So if we look at the potential for TIF 3 to close early, we are projecting, as I had shown in the financial update, that we'd be able to pay off any remaining obligations by 2026. We'll have a residual balance of funds at the end of that TIF district, and we'd have the opportunity to extend the life of the TID for affordable housing. And based on the increment that we're collecting annually and where we're projecting that TID to end, that could be in the ballpark of $10 to $12 million of extra increment that would be generated if we keep the TIF open for that extra year. So certainly a very significant pool of money. And to put that in context, that's almost half of the size of the city's general operating fund each year. Getting into a couple of the specific questions about the timing. Final year for the TIF to incur project costs is September 30th, 2025. So that is the same regardless of whether the city does this extension or not. We have to incur all of our TIF costs by September 30th. The two columns here kind of walk through what the expected closure timeline would be with and without that affordable housing extension. So first, looking at this middle column, if we were to not take advantage of the affordable housing extension, we'd likely be looking at adopting a resolution towards the end of 2025 or very early 26. In that window, the termination year for the state would be 2026, meaning the last tax increment would be received in 2026. We would file our final report to the state in that year. We would complete our audit and close out in 2027. And the benefit for the city and the taxpayers would first hit in our 2027 budget. And that's just because of the timing delay of the tax year, and then that's supporting the budget for the following year. So with the affordable housing extension, that really just shifts the timeline by 1 year for each of these columns. So instead, we'd be closing in 2027. We would have a final year of tax increment for the bills going out in December of 2026 and collected in 2027. We'd then complete our reports to the state, finalize our audit, and we would have the benefits of the TIF district closure hitting for our 2028 budget. And to get to the question of what are those benefits, both for the city budget and the taxpayer. There's kind of three effects that would take place when the TID closes. First is that if there's any residual balance in the TID, outside of the affordable housing extension, but just within the TIF normal life itself, that gets split between the three taxing jurisdictions. The city is about 30% of the tax bill. So if we had, say, $10 million in the TID at the end, 30% of that, $3 million, would come back to the city, and that can be used for general city purposes. That's a one-time payment. The other two items are shown on the slide here. The first is a levy limit adjustment. So our property tax levy limit that constrains our operating levy for our general fund. That can be increased when a TIF district closes or when there's the subtraction of value from a TIF district. The amount of that adjustment is equal to 50% of the final value of the TID. And I have an example calculation here. These numbers, I'm sure, will change, and they're rounded to make the math a little easier, but these are in the ballpark of what we're expecting. So if we anticipate that the final value of the TIF district is 720 million, we would take half of that and divide it by our total non-TIF value in the city, which we're estimating at 4.5 billion. That would result in an 8% levy limit adjustment available for the city to take advantage of if we choose. And based on where we're estimating our general levy would be at that time, of about 16 million, multiplying that by 8%, that's about a $1.3 million levy limit adjustment, which is a very significant adjustment, and that's taking advantage of that significant growth we've had in the TIF district. And to put that into context, our annual levy limit adjustment for the general fund has typically been between $200,000 and $300,000. So it's a very significant adjustment. You have that 1 year to utilize it. If you do utilize it, it does build into your base for future years, but you need to use that the year after the TID closes. The other side of that is the impact for the property taxpayer. And because that levy limit adjustment is based on 50% of the value in the TID, even if you do use that full levy limit adjustment, there still is a projected decrease in the tax rate and the taxes for taxpayers because of the benefit of that increasing tax base from the TID closing. So again, walking through an example with estimated numbers, if prior to the TIF closure, our levy is a total of 22.5 million for both our operating budget and debt service, and we have 4.5 billion in non-TIF tax base. That's a mill rate of about $5 per thousand, and that's about where our mill rate is today. So then we looked at a scenario of saying after closure, if we take advantage of that full levy limit adjustment, our levy would go up by 1.3 million. You divide that new levy by the total tax base, including all of that value in the TIF that now is available for general tax base. So that goes up by 700,000 to 5.2 billion. The projected tax rate would be 4.56 per thousand, or a decrease of about 9%. Now again, the real numbers when we calculate this 3 or 4 years from now will be different, but I think this shows kind of the magnitude of you could be looking at about an 8 to 9% increase in our levy adjustment while still having an 8 to 9% decrease in the tax rate. So if we kind of look at what are the decisions both related to the TID closure and the affordable housing extension, these are items that we should be thinking about and considering as we go through this year in 2024. First, are there any additional project costs that we want to incur before the end of the expenditure period in TID 3? So we have the Pleasant View Road, we have Parmenter reconstruction, there's that placeholder for other TIF costs. And if there is going to be additional TIF projects we want to do, we should be planning that now to make sure we have time to complete them by 2025. Next question, will the city make a donation from TID 3 to TID 5? That's allowed by state law to take advantage of a successful TIF district to roll that money into another TID. It's in our project plan. I think it was originally intended that if there were development on the Meritor site, the TID 3 could help donate to TID 5 to do some of the infrastructure costs related to that development. At this point, we don't know if that development is going to happen by 2025 or if there might be some other project that would be worth a donation, but that's something to consider. Related to that, if we look at final payments from the TID, is should the city make a final payment from the TIF to the Community Development Authority? Right now, TID 3 is providing annual support to the Community Development Authority for projects in the downtown. But after the end of TID 3, we'll no longer have that as a revenue source until potentially in the future if the city creates a new TIF district in the downtown. So one item that's been discussed is perhaps as we near the end of the TIF's life, we should make a lump sum payment intended to support the CDA for a number of years until a new TID could be created. Next, the big question of do we want to utilize that extension for affordable housing? So that if we know if we want to do that, we can be planning for that as we look at the timing for the closure of the TID. And then kind of more of a procedural item, how will we handle the payment of those remaining TIF bonds? Because we have current agreements that go through 2030. We have the ability to prepay those. We could look at setting up escrow accounts and have those payments come out of the escrow. That's something staff can work on with the city attorney's office. And then as we get closer, when would we plan to adopt a termination resolution? So I think main questions at this point of, are the costs we want to incur in the TIF? If so, we should be planning this year and include those in the 2025 budget. And if we are planning to utilize the affordable housing extension, we should start planning for what that would look like and what types of programs would be covered by those funds.
Madam Chair, Alder Wilkes had her hand up before.
I had a question about if you could go back to the slide.
Yep, sure.
Levy. It's just real quick. So this is just a couple of the taxing jurisdictions because there's still school district tax and county tax included. Is that correct? Will those be impacted?
They will be impacted. These slides are just looking at the impact on the city portion, but yeah, that additional tax base is available for all the taxing jurisdictions.
So when we plan things like TIDS and the closure, do we need to be discussing tax of what that will be with the other taxing jurisdictions, or is this kind of our decision?
It's the local city's decision for when to close the TIF district. We have been talking about this as part of our annual joint review board meeting. So the other jurisdictions are aware that we're looking at early closure.
Okay.
And I think as we get closer, we can give them, more specifics about this is the year we're looking at and this is the projected balance.
Okay.
And more to the point, the school district, as you can imagine, is also grappling with the impact of housing as it pertains to enrollment in the district. And so they're keen on conversations about tools and opportunities to increase housing, not specifically just in Middleton, but all across the district. So, we've told them that this is an option for the council to consider, and they're aware that
Affordable housing.
the extension, yep. Mhm. So they're aware that it's something we're thinking about, and, they're, welcoming more information once it's available.
Thank you.
Could I possibly put Abby on the spot? Do you have anything that you're dreaming about that you'd like as a project for TID3 before, or Daphne, I saw that before September of 25?
Oh, specific to projects? No. I think that all of the projects that our staff had identified are already in the project plan. So we didn't have any other projects, but if you wanted to review the TIP District 3 map and look and see if there's anything that comes to mind for elected.
I do have a question. The ponds, did they not apply for TIF funding? The ponds redevelopment?
That project, they went through an initial zoning application, and I believe that they did go through concept review for TIF, but they have decided to put that project on hold because costs right now are too high for them to make that work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess on that point, there was a question about what to do about Meritor, having a placeholder in there. We met with them about a year and a half ago. At that time, they were not ready to make any movement on the property that they own in town. They have a series of capital improvements in some of their other facilities that they're looking at doing, and this parcel was further down on the list for their timeline. We reached out again this year. I've not got any more information from them on where they're at, if their mind has changed, but I will reach out again and let them know that the clock is ticking if that's going to be a reality before 25.
Got it. Oh,
I just am wondering, I always like to know the math of something so I can compare. So what is the advantage of taking the 1-year extension versus building an affordable housing project into our TID 3 plans?
Yeah, I think the advantages of the extension is it gives you funds that can be used anywhere in the city rather than having to be required to be used within TID 3. Potentially gives you more time because we have a hard deadline of 2025 for doing projects within TID 3. Whereas if we do the extension and create a pool of funds, we can use that over multiple years that would extend beyond 2025. I would say that the disadvantages of doing the extension is it delays the impact of the levy limit adjustment and the additional tax base for taxpayers by one year. And we are currently above the threshold where we cannot create additional TIDs or add territory to TIDs. There's a state requirement that if you have more TIF value than 12% of the total value in the city, you can't create a new TIF district. So we are anticipating that once we close TID 3, we will drop below that percentage and we'd be able to create a new TID. It delays that ability by 1 more year.
Okay.
Sorry, in addition, if you'd baked in a project into TID 3, you're in essence limited to probably physical construction versus if you got $12 million from the TIF extension, the city would have the ability to craft whatever programs, policies, grant programs, whatever the case may be, versus if it's a TIF project, it's hard construction. The 12 million from the extension presents more options.
And I have one more question, and that is about the CDA. I'll be honest, I don't know enough about the CDA to know whether it would be worth funding them. I do know, I've asked the question before, if it's a community development authority, why is its area of focus limited to the downtown instead of elsewhere? So I would want to know a lot more about CDA and how it benefits the city before we make a decision on whether to give money to them.
Ms. Mayor, thank you. I have 2 thoughts on the year extension on the affordable housing. I was very interested in having the TIF close early so that we can kind of pivot towards a new TIF. So you may have heard this, but or this idea, I was talking to another mayor, which I don't do often, but she said that they took their extension and they did little grant money, or kind of think of your 70-year-old, widows who maybe don't have $10,000 to upgrade, like just the when you're driving by their house, or new families who can barely make the market and they don't have any money to upgrade, maybe the porch needs, some fixing or whatever that looks like. So like I think they did $5,000 and $10,000, grants, and then it was done all throughout the city. And the reason I bring that up, because we often talk about doing affordable housing and it looks at, apartments, and that is a piece that we need. But for our folks who are in the community and want to do some upgrades, for those neighborhoods, like just that one house in a big neighborhood that, maybe she can't do that work anymore or doesn't have the funds, or a new family in town. So I thought that was a really cool idea. And then the other piece, which might go towards the last item agenda, which is the future topics of the community campus. I think it was Abby who said maybe 6 months ago about if we're looking at redeveloping downtown, if one piece maybe moves away from downtown, maybe we could do affordable housing here, so like that's a kind of a moving concept. And the only reason I say that for downtown is that we have a lot of buildings downtown and it's well loved, but it's hard for growth. And so if we're looking at moving just one of them out, then that might free up space to do something more interesting.
Yeah.
And it would be right here where we already own the land. So that's my only ideas, but I'm really open to everyone's, and just thought I would throw it out there.
I'll just piggyback off that. The grant idea is really great. I'd be interested to know what the city would think about managing some sort of grant program like that. I mean, the staffing, but if you've got the money from the TIF closure, then you build that into a staff position and it's there. I can see the program happening and working. And I also think that it's a good alternative, given the cost of development, to incentivize redevelopment in some of these more blighted areas. I'm looking at the TID 3 map and looking along the University Avenue corridor and thinking about specifically the Castle Apartments, which is for sale and has been for sale and is seeking redevelopment, but it's an odd-shaped piece of land. And it's, I don't think they have a lot of bites. So I think that providing current property owners the ability to redevelop some of these places that could use it would be a pretty cool idea. So is it one of those things that this grant program could still be used within the TID3 property?
You can use it throughout the community. So
So it's
yeah,
not.
it's not geographically tied.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I chuckle only because it's not funny, but when I was with the city of Monona, that was one of my job responsibilities was to manage their revolving loan fund program that they had funded through this exact affordable housing extension. And candidly, it is a bunch of staff time to basically serve as the underwriter for that program. So there's any number of ways that it could be structured if we decided we wanted to do a loan program or a grant program. Some of the other communities in Wisconsin and across the Midwest I've seen have done collaborations with a nonprofit to assist with the management of that. So that, there's a whole host of options that are available if we choose to go down that road in the future.
And to clarify, so at Monona, you as the city administrator, it fell to you. Oh.
Correct. One of the reasons why I'm here.
So we've got someone with experience in
Right.
it.
Tell us not to do that.
I share the excitement of some of these ideas. And I think one of the things I've personally been taking off of the table is being greatly concerned about how quickly we change the levy system. I mean, I've been sitting here waiting for 25 years for this levy to change, and I'm going to be really upset. I don't think most people know about this, or would really, I think the things we could do by extending with this kind of thing would be better than simply making a decision based. So let's get this money back to the people as quick as we can.
And it's nice to know the partners that also will benefit from the closure.
Yeah.
Are seeking the housing that we are talking about. So that's an important thing to realize, is that this is not just our taxes that's involved. It's several different taxing jurisdictions.
Anything else? Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Bill. You're always so clear and concise with your descriptions, and we non-numbers people really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, on to number 3, the discussion on stormwater utility referendum process and potential question for the November 24 election.
Eric, just to give us a quick rundown of kind of where things are at from the Stormwater Utility Board and kind of the work that they're doing right now to get us in preparation for a November question.
Yeah, I don't have a presentation for you. I'll give you a brief summary. Stormwater utility was originally approved in 2014 by referendum. Good. First bills probably went out in 2015. At that time, the ERU rate was set to $15. And by ERU rate, I mean equivalent residential unit. So that's what a single family home would pay. Duplex would pay 2 ERUs, triplex 3 ERUs. And then commercial properties, we actually measure the impervious area and then they're charged. We convert that to a number of ERUs and they're charged that rate. That $15 was either somewhat or completely arbitrary, not really based on a survey of needs. After the 2018 floods, another referendum was put before voters. We raised the ERU rate to $45, and that extra funding was to be used for flood repairs. That increase in the ERU is due to sunset at the end of this year, which is what's leading us to this discussion of another referendum to maintain or raise or, figure out what we need to do. So what we're in process of doing right now is a rate study that actually assesses our actual needs. And we're going to bring that to Stormwater Utility Board at this month's meeting and anticipate they'll make recommendations to council on how to proceed. We have made great progress with repairing the flood damage from 2018, but we have not been able to make a lot of progress with all of the deferred maintenance that was identified in the early 2000s and what led to the creation of the stormwater utility in the first place. One of the things we'll ask for is a recommendation on whether or not we can fund 2 staff positions with the stormwater utility. That's kind of the main thing. One of the reasons we're not making much progress is because we don't have the staff to be able to manage this whole thing. I think with that, I'll just take questions.
Does the referendum question have to specify what the funds would be used for? Like, do we have to mention 2 staff people, or is that not required?
I don't think it does. But that's a question for Matt Fleming also. I think the way the first 2 referenda were structured, they were pretty specific. And that's what's kind of leading us to this position where anytime we want a specific fee increase or something, we have to go back to referendum. But I don't think that's a requirement from statute.
Okay, and then also on the ERUs for residential. So it doesn't matter what the lot size is, all houses pay the same?
It's strictly based on impervious area. There are some in the state that would take a lot size into consideration, but the simplest way to do it is to determine an average impervious area on a residential parcel. And then you set that as your ERU. And then any commercial parcel, we're just measuring the impervious area. So it doesn't matter if you have a 5-acre lot and a single family home, still just one ERU.
Okay. And I guess, given that the current rate is only $45 a year, this isn't a huge deal, but it sounds like the smaller houses are being or the houses with a smaller impervious surface area are being overcharged, and those with a larger one are being undercharged.
I don't know if that's the right way to look at it. The main purpose of this is to kind of, if we were to fund all this with property taxes, a residential property ends up with a higher percentage of that burden. When we put it into this ERU, we're charging people fees based on their actual contributions of runoff to the system. And we're also able to capture fees from tax exempt facilities like churches and city properties, institutional properties. So it reduces, I want to say residential properties, we're probably paying 2/3 of these costs under a property tax system, and it's more like 1/3 under an ERU, a user rate system.
Sure. No, I'm not suggesting that we're doing it, that a utility is not the way to go. I think the utility is great, but I'd like to hear from.
I mean, maybe it's a misunderstanding for me of the question, but if you have somebody who has a 10,000 square foot lot and somebody has a 6,000 square foot lot, we're paying exactly the same amount.
That's correct.
And so there's you can get a 2 or 3 acre single family home that's still going to pay $45. And to me, that's where there may be a potential inequity in part of it. It's not between businesses and homes, it's like taking all homes as being one exactly the same thing is.
I feel like
That's a good point. I mean, that's correct. One of the reasons why we take an average for residential properties is because it would be so cumbersome to try to measure them all and try to keep them all updated and things like that. And I think most residential properties are more similar than they are different.
I was
But
going to
that's
say,
the
it
philosophy.
seems like it's a collective effort that we want to prevent stormwater damage. And so we're all pitching in the same amount to help as a whole. Do you, as a staff, have a recommendation of what you would like the ERU rate to become?
That will come out of this rate study that we're in process of.
Got it. Okay.
And we'll give a series of questions like that to Stormwater Utility Board and ask what should be funded.
Go ahead.
The clarification, I'm new at this. Where do I see this $45,500 or $45? Is it included in my tax bill or?
It comes on your,
Water
it
and
comes on
sewer.
your water and sewer bill every quarter.
Okay, yeah, I don't pick that apart.
I was on Stormwater Utility Board for a little time, and I have to say they do a really great job debating a lot of things, and I do want to say thank you for that. It strikes me on your question on whether you can have a person be funded, because we had a debate about that about a year and a half ago, I think, and as part of their regular dialogue. And I thought it was such a great question because some of our retention areas for development in my former district when I was an alderwoman were not being inspected. And so people would have questions: who takes care of these? How does this happen? You know, who is in charge of it? And it was a struggle as people move into the district to know, you know, whose territory is it? How do we know it's functioning? Is it being kept up? And so they talked to me about that. And I just want to highlight that to you all, because if you're not on stormwater utility, you may not know that that's the kind of robust discussion that they have. So just thank you.
You're welcome. And SWUB has actually recommended already funding these two positions pending referendum passage. And I'll also say Chair of SWUB and longtime Water Resources Commission member Jim Bachhuber is here too.
Can I make a few comments?
Sure, absolutely.
Join?
Come on up.
Not at all, Jim.
The more informed we are, the better we.
I don't know if I can. I just wanted to, I'm Jim Bachhuber. I know many of you. I am the current chair of the Stormwater Utility Board. And in my career, before I retired, I worked with literally dozens and dozens of cities throughout Wisconsin and elsewhere on stormwater utility development since the 90s. Normally, what's supposed to happen, it didn't happen here, is you figure out what your stormwater program is. What are all the components that are eligible for funding through a stormwater utility? And you identify those costs, capital and non-capital, okay? There's a lot of things people don't think about: street sweeping, storm sewer cleaning, drainage ditch mowing, leaf pickup, and then the usual stuff: detention basins and ponds and all the things you think about. The point is, normally, what most cities did, identify your costs first, identify your customer base, that's your ERU number, total number in the city, and do the math. How much is that going to cost per ERU? Now we know, is that a bearable cost or not? Is this what we want to do? You don't say, we're going to charge X dollars and do whatever we can with that money. And that's kind of what happened. I was involved in this process back in the 10 years ago or more. So what we're doing now is trying to reconstruct what should have been done in the beginning. And then the decisions gets made: no, we don't want to fund this. Yes, we do want to fund that. It's not that you're going to fund it one way. You're just going to sweep streets one way or the other. Do you want to pay for it with taxes? Or, in my opinion, because I've been doing this for a while, and maybe I just see things a little bit differently, is it a more fair and equitable way to distribute costs, just like paying for electricity, water, sewer? Everybody pays for that if you get that service. You get this service too, whether you're a church or a school or a city or an individual homeowner, you pay for the service. And this is a way to distribute those costs among all the customers. So when we get our report, Eric and I and Richard met this morning. We discussed some draft material and started looking at stuff. February, SWUB will look at the report and make some recommendations. And then decisions can get made on what kind of rate are we going to end up with, given the program that we want to fund. Thank you.
Can I have you clarify something? When you were talking about putting the putting street sweeping on the utility, and you mentioned churches. So this is the way that the churches will actually have to pay for it.
Yes, right. Their fair share, yeah. Everybody pays their fair share.
Great point. Thank you.
It's just like paying for electricity,
That's right.
okay?
And I was thinking as we were talking, I really appreciate that clarification. That helps a lot because it explains the breadth of the program. Because when I hear stormwater, I think what goes down the storm
The ditch.
sewer, and I don't think about street sweeping, leaf pickup. And so when I was having pause, when you talked about the ERU, but it's split equally across all residential units in the city, and you were talking about the size of the lots. Well, larger lots don't have as much runoff because they have
Yeah.
gardens
Yeah.
and
Grass,
lawns. And so you have, you know, the smaller lots have more impervious surface. We just went through this with the zoning code. We talked about all the different levels. So I'm thinking in my head, well, you know, but I probably have more trees on my lot if I have a lawn, where if you have a smaller lot, you don't have as much trees. And so it is an equal way to sort of balance out all of those services without having to pinpoint each type of service that's being provided and breaking that out. So I really appreciate your explanation, and it clarified a lot in my head. So I really appreciate it.
Well, it comes back to our discussion of sidewalks too, that the sidewalks are there is really a city function. Anybody anywhere in the city can walk on a sidewalk, and it's not just your sidewalk, it's just for you. And so why do I pay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cities have gone down that path of trying to micro-identify each home. It's a huge data management assessment, and the return is frankly negligible because you're still generating the same amount of revenue once all is said and done.
That's
So it's a lot of effort. And thank you for bringing up we think about stormwater as mainly being, that's flooding, that's what gets the headlines, that's what people get up in arms about. But the city is also under a fairly significant burden for water quality, water pollution. And that's another big chunk of your stormwater requirements here in Middleton. And we all benefit from that too, if you like to see Pheasant Branch Creek and Lake Mendota and things like that, are getting improved and being managed properly. And you're also regulated anyway, so you got to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Wonderful. Excellent. Any other questions?
thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very good. Thank you both. I would like to call for a little break, maybe 10 minutes.
Yep.
Okay. I brought some foam rollers. Sitting is really bad for your health, and I'm going to be doing a little foam roller exercise. So come on down in front of the chairs if you want to stretch out.
Okay, just for the recording, I'm going to pause the audio and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes at 1:53.
I'm not gonna fall.
Go Abby, just right up there. I'm right into
And we have natural kettle ponds too, like Demon Pond, and it's like, how do we protect? Yeah, it's,
Yeah. 'Cause I also.
there's a lot of.
Thanks, we're gonna reconvene.
Yeah, doing,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
I'm thinking, I wonder if there's something else you did, you don't even know.
No, I got my.
I mean, certainly I know that octave, if I'm staring, like when I'm working, I do a lot of music transcription, staring for 6 hours.
Thank you for coming back from a break.
And then I sound like.
We're going on with our discussion items. Let's go on to discussion on city committee streamlining and consolidation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had added this item to the agenda to give the council some space to talk about this item. As you recall, it is an item that you've identified as a priority in the comprehensive plan. I guess the genesis of this is looking to find ways to streamline and be more efficient in the way that we do some governance in places where there are committees that have overlapping missions or responsibilities. The council identified wanting to take a look at that and see if there's ways to consolidate committees that make sense to consolidate. I did in part of your packet include a list of all the committees that I'm aware that exist in the city and where I could find information either from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities or state statute directly. I've highlighted the ones that are statutorily required, meaning that we have to have them in some capacity. And in some cases, you have to have them exactly as we have them structured today. But just wanted to give you a full list of the committees that exist in the community. So with that, I'll pause, take any questions you might have. I will also add included materials from Stormwater Utility Board and Water Resources because they have actively started the conversation about the potential for consolidation of their two committees into one. So that material is in your packet for reference.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Do you have anybody who's got recommendations and suggestions that they would like to make at this point?
Well, I just want to say that I appreciate that this item is in the strategic plan. This was one of the things in the strategic plan that I completely wholeheartedly agreed with, because I do think that if we can figure out a way to consolidate and streamline our committees, that'll reduce the burden on staff, it'll reduce the burden on volunteers, and also make their participation more meaningful. I know some people in my district have expressed frustration because they thought they were all excited about joining a particular committee and then it never met. So, that's another benefit, is to increase satisfaction. And it can also streamline city government operations if we don't have like one committee that has to refer everything to 4 other committees. So I think this is great. I love, kudos to Eric and company for getting out in front with the SWUB and WRMC. That one always struck me as great potential because 3 of the members of SWUB come from WRMC. That's a big number. I also think we've discussed this before, how personnel and finance might be another opportunity to streamline. It might not make a huge difference, but it does eliminate the possibility that someone's going to get appointed to personnel from the council and have to come to that meeting and then do something else for an hour, while they're waiting for the finance committee to be over. So little changes like that can make a difference. I also wonder if PRFC, the Parks Commission, and Conservancy Lands might be an opportunity to consolidate. I've always been concerned that, Conservancy Lands doesn't meet that frequently, but it also seems to have to compete with Parks. Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, and Conservancy are all in one department, and yet you've got these 2 committees that are not balanced. And I feel like Conservancy Lands suffers as a result.
Would public lands fall in that same, could that be a triple, or is that completely different, that endowment?
That one, I don't even think exists anymore.
We passed a resolution, I thought, getting rid of it at one point.
Yeah, that was one where the organization, the endowment fund, had asked to basically claim back the authority over the fund. So that one, it's still on our books, but that can be taken off because it's not an active committee.
Yeah, cool, okay. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to.
Sorry.
If you're done.
I was done.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I mean, for my years of chairing parks, I always wondered why there were two committees, because we put a parks person on Conservancy Lands Committee. And we often have communications and issues about who owns which little plot of land. And we do exactly the same thing. So I would, from my experience, the only downside would be that Parks is a very busy committee. We would meet every 2 weeks and always had pretty big agendas, but I don't think Conservancy Land had that much, but it certainly would be in favor of looking at that one. I mean, others like the Committee on Youth, we haven't been on the camp council now in 9 months and we haven't met once yet. So, you know, there's either no agendas is typically or something happened. But whether there's certain committees where you could, you know, make them more like an ad hoc committee system where you can say, okay, once a year or something, we see a need coming up. So let's pull together a committee or the equivalent of the committee poll to deal with some of these issues might be better than having these standing committees. But I also agree with the one with the proposal with the water and stuff that I think that's great, but I would look at Conservancy and Parks too.
Madam Chair, sorry, I meant to mention this in my opening comments on this item. In addition to the potential for consolidation of certain committees, one of the other things that we had talked about, and I think is true for the committee chairs, vice chairs, and the staff, is that there are times where committees don't need to meet every month. I think there was a past practice going back a number of years where committees were kind of on the schedule of consistently meeting every month. And there are times where agenda items aren't ready for whatever reason because more research needs to be done, and it makes sense to cancel that meeting and delay those items to a future meeting, be it a month or so later. So I think just setting that expectation for the committee chairs and vice chairs and the staff that it's okay to not meet. It's okay to meet when you've got an agenda that has items on it, and if stuff isn't ready, it's okay to not meet a particular month, knowing that you're going to meet again in the near future.
Good point. And I would like to say yes, and it is also still nice to know the day of the month that you're going to meet instead of trying to organize everyone's schedule. Even if we're not going to meet every month, you need to be able to carve out that time and have it open. Is anyone else seeing anything that you'd like to see condensed? Yeah, Dave.
I'm on ethics, it's never met. And so I'm just sort of curious. Ethics seems very personnel related. And if there's a need for ethics, or if it's one of these needs that comes up on an ad hoc basis. If something comes up, then you create ethics. Are you have some wage at will to put it together. And go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a very important, this coming back to the youth that we don't meet. I think you set up an expectation among people who you invite to be on the boards, and then they never meet, and they feel disenfranchised, or they feel, oh, this is what's going on. Nobody really listens. Nobody cares. And so I think that an effort could be made to take some of these committees that do very little work, find a way to niche them into some other existing committee and avoid that problem of getting citizens involved and say, thanks, but we'll see you in a couple of years.
I guess we'd have to look at the charter of ethics.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just ethics, but I think there's probably 5 or 10 of those committees under.
Yep.
So if I may ask, Alder Schaefer, would you see these ad hoc committees, the members being pulled from existing committees, like say the Commission on Youth needs to meet, so you pull somebody from Parks, you pull somebody from the Library Board, you pull somebody, and then you have them meet about whatever issue. And is that the expectation that there's like one person that would serve on that committee that's like a seated, like that chair, that seat on that committee would serve on that committee if it is called? Or is it one of those things that if that committee needs to meet, depending on the issue addressed, you would pull from which committees are involved?
I think when I mentioned ad hoc, that would be the idea, but I'm not sure that's the best idea. What I'm mentioning here is find some other committee who has enough sense of overlap with the subjects that would be covered in that committee, and just have that committee deal with those issues.
So you would just take those committees and consolidate?
Consolidate
Okay,
them
so
into
you're not
something.
talking about?
That's right.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you.
That reduces committees.
Okay.
It gets a little more work to some other lesser work committees, but it also gets rid of
Okay.
disenfranchised.
Yeah, maybe, there'd be opportunity then. You can actually, by combining some of the committees, then you could actually make that committee itself a larger one. So if some people show up, some people don't show up,
Yeah.
or miss meetings, there's always a nice number of people there to be adding input and you are always kind of assured a quorum.
I mean, you can look at, say, for example, Commission on Aging, Commission on Youth. They're both commissions dealing with portions of people in society. Those would be a logical place to think, couldn't you put together one committee that would take care of the business of both of those? I don't know, but
And create a whole new, residents committee or something.
yeah.
What
Human
about,
resources.
what about public safety and the EMS commission? Would those work together?
Well, I'm on EMS and we've never met. And I talked to the head of the EMS. He said, oh, you'll probably meet twice a year, but we don't do anything anyway.
And I know Jen made a comment at one point that they discussed at public safety about getting something along those lines. So I don't know if it was police commission taking, but I know that there's been discussion at public safety.
Yeah, and just to, excuse me, just to clarify that there are some exceptions and some guidelines. You are statutorily required to have a police commission. You're statutorily required to have a fire commission. Those handle hiring, firings, and disciplinary actions for those two branches of service. So those need to be separate. The public safety committee is more of a policy committee, which does interplay with police, fire, and EMS, but more on the policy level of establishing how certain operational things are done within those three departments from a policy level. But you might be able to consolidate EMS into public safety. I'd have to look more into that, but you could not consolidate public safety into police and fire commissioner or the other way around because those are statutorily required.
Gotcha.
All right, but that's still 2 from 3.
Well, an emergency preparedness, I don't know, I believe you sit on that as mayor.
And that's more of an internal committee. So
Okay,
for
yeah.
handling how,
Okay.
city facilities and things like that.
Alder Crow, did you have a
No,
comment?
I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I loved Alder Schaefer's suggestion about aging and youth. I've thought the same thing, like, is there, a commission on living or, on resident life or something like that? And again, going back to the idea of conservancy lands over here having to compete with parks, recreation, and forestry over here for funding and attention, I think the same thing happens with the aging and the youth. And I would imagine, I haven't served on the Commission on Aging, but I do usually, right at this time, play pinochle at the senior center. And so I know that there are a lot of people who would probably resist that idea, but I think it's still worth considering because we need to have parity between our oldest and youngest populations. And I
Absolutely.
think combining the two is one way to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great. The mayor.
I think it's a great idea, especially from the resident living perspective, and the programming. The one thing I want you to know about having sat on Aging Commission for 5 years is that they do Meals on Wheels and casework. So their social workers will discuss casework. So like the programming matches. But I would say 50 to 80% of the discussion is actually Meals on Wheels and social work cases.
But they could still be, they're sensitive to those populations. So I think they could also be sensitive to youth population.
Very
Special needs
possibly.
of living. I mean, I'm not saying that one's going to be an expert on the other, but they're
Right.
trying to look at streamlined committees. Here's one way to think about it.
Alder Crow.
And before you, Alder Schaefer, I served on Youth Commission. We did actually meet fairly regularly before, so
Okay.
I don't know what happened when I left. Everything fell apart.
They cancel.
Yeah, well, and there were some months that we really didn't have anything. And I haven't been on Aging Commission, but I know that the Youth Commission was very specific to programs for, middle school kids and summer programs that they did. And while I like the idea of intergenerational kind of stuff, they may be very different types of agendas as to
I've not been on the
what they have to,
aging either, so
Yeah.
it's just
so.
throwing out some thoughts.
Mhm. Does the Emergency Preparedness Committee, is that just, is that actually a committee that meets?
Not necessarily, only in the instance where we would have, a situation that comes up that we would need to meet about.
The chain of command
Mhm.
thing. So that doesn't have to be like considered in the public safety.
Correct. Yeah,
blending.
that it's separate because again, public safety is more looking at broader policy issues. Emergency management is more specific to how our response is to specific instances.
Go ahead.
Alder Wilkes.
Go ahead, you can go.
I was going to ask, what's the building committee?
Again, that's another internal committee that consists, the mayor is a member, and I forget who the other older representative is, but for any sort of city building projects where we'd be doing construction. So as we, make some decisions on civic campus plan, that committee would be involved in addition to the finance committee, council, and all of the other individual committees that would have some aspect to that project.
Okay, and we do still have a community campus committee, correct?
Mhm.
When I looked at the website, it still shows Alder Kathy Olson as the, yeah.
Yeah, so that's one item. I haven't had a chance to talk to all of the staff members that are involved in it yet, but that is one where I think there could be some changes in the structure of that particular committee. When it was formed back in 2019, the committees that sent a representative to it opted to send a staff member as their voting representative for the committee. And, candidly, I think that creates some difficulties for that staff person being both the representative of their department and also, voting on matters pertaining to that project. So I think a different solution would be to have staff members serve in a ex officio advisory assistance role and then have, a member from the library board, member from Committee on Aging, and a member from, forget the third one, Parks, be appointed to actually serve in the voting committee member role rather than staff person.
Thanks.
Would it make sense for building to be part of that? The building committee to be part of community?
Not necessarily, because again, that's specific to one, discrete project. Whereas if we were doing like an expansion at the mock, for example, the building committee would be involved in that. But I mean, we can definitely take a look at the building committee and see if that one is maybe it was a product of a different time and it's not needed anymore. We can take a look at that.
But my presumption is most of these committees are not stacked with people who are experts in one and one only narrow niche of responsibility. And the idea that they may be dealing with slightly different things doesn't mean these people can't deal with it and shouldn't do with it. I'm not convinced that youth and aging, they do different things, but it doesn't mean that somebody who's on one committee can't understand anything that's going on the other committee. They're both dealing with people and how do we treat people on committees. So I think we have to get away from the idea that, they do different things, so therefore they can't come together.
Well, and in that particular example, I think it's educational for both ends of the spectrum to be aware what the other's needs are. And that just, I think, could break down silos and build more community.
Right. Alder Wilkes.
How did your discussion with committee chairs go the other night that you held? Was there any mention of this? Did you get any sense of what?
I think,
We asked for their feedback.
yeah.
Okay. So is that what the next step is in this, is getting the feedback from the committees and what they might see? I'm just wondering where we go from this general discussion into more action.
Yeah, I'd offer one suggestion for consideration. You've identified a couple of specific committees, Personnel and Finance, Parks and CLC, and SWUB and WARM are a couple that I think are maybe more ripe for that discussion. Having those committees start to have that conversation and then put forward a plan that would then go to Illinois for consideration. Once Illinois has an opportunity to take a look at it, then it'd come back to council for consideration. So I maybe start with that, and then some of these other committees we can continue to take a look at if it makes sense to change the way that they're structured.
And that's exactly what I was hoping to hear as a member and chair of the LNO, because we had received a request from finance and personnel to start the discussion, and Matt Fleming said, well, we don't have any guidelines. How do they see this looking? How many members do they want to have? How many, do you go more than 4? Do you include, what would the ideal makeup of that committee be like? Looking for, information from the existing committees.
Hmm.
So if we can get that from that, it helps to start drafting any changes into the ordinances that we need to do.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. To that point, I would say if our attorney needed that much information, then we don't really need him to do the drafting of a description. Why would we refer that to him instead of doing it ourselves? I mean, the referral was to take the conversation that the personnel and finance committees had and turn that into a draft description for the committees to look over and mark up. But I mean, if he needs that level of detail, we might as well save his time and just write the draft description ourselves.
And if the committees want to do that, then and send that to L&O for consideration.
Okay. One last thing I wanted to mention is the whole liaison relationship, because I'm a liaison from the Plan Commission to Ped Bike and Transit. And I totally appreciate being involved in the Ped Bike and Transit Committee discussions. But I will say, most of the time, I'm thinking there's nothing I'm going to take back to Plan Commission, and I have nothing to bring from Plan Commission except for the zoning code when we were looking at it. And I wonder if the committees could also be asked to consider their liaison relationships, and are those really necessary, or could, if there's, a need to have interaction between the two committees or keep them in touch with one another, is there another way to do that without giving one volunteer another committee assignment by virtue of, being the liaison?
Good question.
I was just gonna say, one thing would be something similar I would suggest to what we're doing on council, is that you can allow people to just report in, have a committee request in their committee to send a report over. And so that person, whoever needs to report, can say, has a month to prepare before that next meeting, will be aware of what's going on, you can report over.
Great
That
idea.
makes sense than having to sit on 3 different
Great idea.
committees.
Alder Lorman.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so maybe from an ordinance standpoint, we need to look at allowing alders and committee members to have that latitude. So if one member on one committee or commission says, I really need to go to Plan Commission or Public Works or whatever, as a voice of that particular committee, commission that, you're on, to be involved in a topic or subject matter. Maybe not necessarily as a voting member. I mean, I think we'd have to figure that out. Because that's, you can't have that. You can't say, I'm showing up here to vote. But to say, as a member of a committee, there's something that is, pertains to this committee, commission, and I think we need to, hand carry it to that committee, commission at their meeting and speak and discuss and be, not seen as, really kind of an outsider, but as an insider communicating. Obviously, again, no voting power, but I don't know, say, sometimes I get the sense of Plan Commission and Public Works, there, an enormous amount of overlap. And just, say you're in the really kind of depth of a project, you're like, well, we need to just go there and communicate with them. So let's do it. And have that kind of latitude, but make it crystal clear that just because a person from one commission is showing up at the other, it's not there to vote. It's there.
It would have to be on the agenda.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's nothing just, random. I mean, it would be a formal request, so, I don't know, hypothetically sitting on the airport commission and there's got to do something that involves public works. I don't know, some infrastructure or, I don't know, water mains or who knows what. And be like, okay, let's put this on public works. But it would be almost required that a member of that other commission go to that meeting. So things are articulated.
Yeah, I like that.
I don't know.
Cool. No, these are good ideas.
And then it's sort of,
Yeah,
I'm done.
I guess I think when, the situation where you need that kind of articulation, it's good to have that on there.
Mhm.
Maybe a different way to look at the same thing is not making it such a rigid requirement for, say, people from cross committees to have to be at every meeting. For example, I was chair in parks, so I sat on plan commission for 3 years, and much of it was important, but there were many agendas where you do nothing but sign variations. Now, why is park sitting here
Mhm.
and I'm waste a whole evening looking at sign variations when it's not really my bailiwick? So maybe there'd be a way to just be a little more open about, not going to be there tonight, don't penalize me.
Or, I'm sorry.
No, please.
If,
Yeah.
I was thinking if our current guy from Parks.
Yeah.
If we knew there was gonna be one item and having staff put it at the front end of the agenda,
Yeah, so they
Sit.
can leave or something.
can leave.
Yeah. Yeah, or you call and say, we're not doing nothing that's related to parks. You don't need to bother coming.
Go ahead.
I think of just a really a recent example that this is fresh in my mind was with our winter snow. And I was getting some, some input from constituent side of things, and realized, oh, wow. Yeah, Conservancy and Lands does have some responsibility for seeing that snow is cleared on trails and paths and things like that. But the thing is, the people who, are literally paid to do it, right, is Public Works crew. And so then to say, oh, we have an issue and get it on agenda, but then make sure that a CLC person is at the next Public Works meeting to say, here's the input, here's what we're hearing, and now we're presenting it to you, and now done, let's work it out.
I like that.
I think that's just kind of a nice working example. And so on one hand, we're saying it'd be, but we're talking about, merging CLC and parks, because there's some logic there in kind of a larger scope of things. But yet there's this overlap in terms of just city business and responsibility that has to take place.
For tactics, do you have on your screen, like, I'm looking at the list. You take out the statutorily required or put them in a second column by chance and then see what's left? Because I heard great ideas, but I'm having a hard time following either what's left, like what might be batched together or merged. And then if there's anything left.
But do we have to exclude statutorily? Because maybe Parks and Rec can absorb something else.
That's right. Put conservancy into parks, but you still want to see perks there.
Or like put it in a second column and then we could move it on, like, whatever works, but I'm trying to figure out if we kind of covered everything.
What would be to have a couple of weeks now that we've had this discussion to think about these things and then come back with a little more concrete plan. I don't think you're looking for a solution today.
On the pragmatic side of, how do we proceed? I'm curious to know what the timeline is because and this is something that we could probably clean up in our ordinances when any of these changes get made, but it's really not clear anywhere. When do the terms begin and end? And now, some of them are assigned by state statute, so those would be different, but it's, it was very confusing to figure out when exactly do we need to solicit new members, applications from volunteers to serve on these committees. So is it at all possible to accomplish any consolidation before committee recruitment begins? And then also, what about the idea of tasking all the staff with going to their committees to ask the question of any, just evaluate the liaison relationships and how to improve those or change them frequency of meetings. Does this committee need to meet every month or can we meet every other month? Workforce housing, we had that conversation. And so last year we only met quarterly, but now because housing is a big deal, we're on a timeline to get to the TID closure. The Workforce Housing Committee is going to be meeting monthly. And then the third item is any opportunity for consolidation, I would think.
If I could just quickly,
He was next.
oh, okay,
So, dumb question. So why do we have conservancy in lands when, shouldn't it just be Parks, Rec and Forestry? Or are there real limits that a conservancy can't be part of a Parks, Rec and Forestry? Is that because conservancies are considered different land?
it's my understanding that Conservancy was originally a subcommittee of parks and then at some point took on their own autonomy as a separate entity to give them more flexibility, but it actually originally came out of that maybe 10, 15 years ago.
I think that'll be put back together. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
All right.
Yeah, I was just gonna share, I applaud what Alder Hanaya was saying. And I think one more thing would be really helpful to go to committees is actually give them this list. Ask them the same question. So not just who is your liaison, but look at that. Do you see any of these other committees? You come to these meetings, you know what you deal with. Do you see any connections that might exist as a way of just simply increasing our ability to know who might weld together? Other than that, I think that's a great idea.
I was just gonna suggest that we use the April election as a time because all their committee appointments change at that time. So that would be my suggestion as a deadline focus to sort of have an idea of how this is, what's been consolidated, what is continuing, and then moving forward that with the start of that term.
Would that have to go through LNO by that time? I'm just asking.
I don't know.
logistically.
I honestly don't know off the top of my head how many of these are specifically written into the ordinances and their makeup versus which ones are just mentioned in passing. Because a lot of them, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I mean, in the city's ordinances, some committees have more robust description in them than others. Typically, they lean towards ones that either are statutorily required or we have in our ordinance required because of the nature of the work that we're doing. Others that have more of a policy bent to them have a little bit lighter description, but I can go through the ordinances and figure out, what the language is. So Alder Hanairo's question about the start and stop for committee appointments and map that all out.
I just have one more comment and then I want to move on. It's been mentioned that Arts Committee, breaks my heart to say this, should break off and become its own Friends of Middleton Public Art as a way to be able to receive money and not have tricky entanglements with the city. That will have to be worked on so that we figure out a good structure on how that goes. Yes, ma'am.
Just asking, is that paralleling Friends of the Library? Because don't they have a second group?
Not anymore.
Thank you. Just clarifying.
I've also heard that suggested by the chair of the Public Arts Committee that she thinks that they should form a 501c3 because right now there are several grants that we're not eligible for. One example of that is the Dane County Cultural Arts Grant. We actually submitted an application yesterday for one of those grants, but we had to find a 501c3 partner. So we partnered with the Art and Lit Laboratory in Madison to apply for those funds. But yeah, that's something that could be considered by the council.
My years at the university, that's done a lot there because of trying to get through procurement rules and things like that. Is you create a 503c that then does the purchasing things, buys and then donates the stuff. And it works very well if the problem is bureaucracy.
Great. And it would save on staff time too, I think. Right. Okay, let's move on if there are no other comments. Number 5 on the discussion items, update on 2024 elections planning. And as if on cue, here's our elections
Baby on?
expert, Lori Burns.
Right. Oh, and I got the clicker.
Thank you for taking the time out of
Oh,
your
you're
day.
welcome. So I wasn't sure exactly what you were looking for, so I just came up with a little PowerPoint for you. You have, is it on your screens?
Give me one
Not
second.
yet.
Okay. Like, I guess I should have printed it so then I could see.
While we're waiting for it to come up, I just want to make a plug for Municipalities Magazine this month, all about housing. It's great. A lot of good information in there. And the meeting is going to be here in Middleton in October. The League of Wisconsin Municipalities meeting is going to be at so exciting.
All right. All right. So we'll just give you a quick little overview. These are the election dates for 2024. We will have 4 elections. The upcoming spring primary, excuse me, is just the school board race. So Ward 18 and the 2 streets in Ward 17 won't be voting. Those are the Wanakee school districts. So I already had Terrence Wall email me to ask me where his ballot was. Like, you don't get one. So those questions are coming in already. Voter registration, brief overview. People can register to vote up to 20 days before each election on the My Vote website. They don't need to send us in any documentation. They can also mail us applications up to 20 days before each election. They have to mail us proof of residence with that. So if any of your constituents, that's kind of why I'm providing some of this information for you. So if anybody asks you, and then we take registrations up until the Friday before each election in our office until 5 o'clock. Our 4 polling places. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Was there a change? Because I thought you used to be able to register day of.
Yeah, on election day.
On election day.
Yep, you can
You can
still
still do
register on
that.
election day at the polls.
Can't
Yep,
come in Saturday or Sunday.
yep.
You guys can't do it on Monday.
And you can't do it on Monday, yep. The 4 polling places with the change to the district service center from Lakeview, we did mail postcards in January, so voters should have received those. Voting options, so the early voting by mail, we are mailing ballots out now. 21 days before the spring and 48 days before the fall elections, we get those ballots in the mail. So they can start doing that now. We did our big mailing this past Tuesday for February. They're continued to be mailed up until the Friday before each election. And photo ID is not needed with the application if someone has provided one previously, unless they've moved or changed their name. So that is good to know. In the clerk's office then, this begins 14 days before each election, ends the Friday before. They must bring photo ID in. We're gearing up for hours. We decided 9 to 3:30 each day. That gives us time to set up in the morning. And then, of course, we take everybody that's in line since our hours are till 4. Obviously, if we're here till 5 o'clock taking voters because they were in line, we'll stay. We do plan on working the first Saturday of early voting for April and November, half day for a little extended hours. I think with the mail and with these hours, people, and election day all day, people should be covered if they want to vote early. Any questions with that? No?
Just clarify, it was February 20th?
Yes, yep. So we start on Tuesday for early voting for that.
Great. And again, so no early voting on Saturday for February or August.
Correct, yeah, we just don't get the foot traffic for those elections, yeah. Early voting in the clerk's office then, for February and August, our staff will handle the early voting right in our area there. April and November, we'll set up shop here again in the council chambers like we did in November of 22. We'll have 7 people working. 1 person will work in our office, just helping with all the stuff coming in and going out in the mail, which is a huge takeover. We'll have 6 here in the council chambers, 3 checking in voters, 1 witnessing, 1 filing, and then 1 person working as a float. Sometimes the lines get kind of long and there's lots of people to register. So we have that person walking around, making sure everybody's registered, if not filling out forms ahead of time so we can get them in. So by the time they get into the room, hopefully they're in the system and ready to go to kind of speed things up. I just wanted to give a little brief overview of the differences between early voting by mail and early voting in the clerk's office. There isn't much difference. A lot of people think by coming in and voting early in the clerk's office, it's a different process, but it's really the only thing that's different is we have the witness here and you leave your ballot here. They all think, that it's just easier or different. Well, it's not. It might be easier to vote from home if you have a witness, but just wanted to provide those differences so you could see that there's not much of a difference. Voting options on election day, then again, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. We'll have a smaller staff working in February and August, just due to the amount of voters that come in. April and November, we hope to have 20 per polling place. So the shift, there are 20 people all day. 3 check-in stations for people that are already registered, 2 stations just for registrations. Of course, if there's no line at check-in, and there's a line at registrations, the check-in people can help the registrations to get that line down. And then we'll use 2 machines for processing absentees. But if there is a huge line and it's not going down, we can stop processing absentees, use those machines to try to get the lines down, and then continue on with absentee. I think that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, is this still true? You can't register any of the absentee ballots until that morning at
election day,
7
yep.
a.m.
Yep,
Right.
till election day.
That's right.
Yep.
And how are you set for volunteers?
Hard to tell. Like right now, I just did some trainings this week I'm making all of my workers take this hands-on training. So I set the machines up and back just to kind of help them. Our training videos just may not give them the full experience. So I have them come in and we do some scenarios on the machines so they are a little more comfortable with them. So I trained 14 people this week on that. I have a lot of snowbirds in February. So although the schedule looks like it's filling up. And November 2020, we had a lot of people come out of the woodwork that just worked that election. And then, I haven't seen them since. So I have a feeling it'll probably be the same for this April and November. They'll just show up, they'll be there. So hopefully it won't be an issue.
Wave your arms over here if you need any help on the
Yep.
bigger elections.
Yep.
Because as
For
long as
sure.
we're not on the ballot,
Yep.
we're fine. Go ahead, Ms. Mayor.
This question is for Brian. In the past, we had council on some election nights, and sometimes people would walk in because they were, and not to the city
Mhm.
clerk's fault, but they were just confused. Are we planning to do, if it's the first of the Tuesday, are we planning to still have council, or is that being thought about?
February 20th will be a council meeting.
Yeah, the 20th is a council meeting. We could, that one is because of a scheduled public hearing, that one we can't move. But if there was a conflict on, for example, the April or the November, we can move the council meeting to an alternative day.
And maybe that would be the more volume of people who come out that are more infrequent that wouldn't know. So maybe that's something to think about. Because I think April is the presidential primary.
Mhm.
So we might get people who kind of vote every 2 to 4 days
Yeah.
rather than our usual spring.
Yeah, and a lot of people think they vote here because they early vote here. So before we even used the council for 2022 for that when St. Bernard's was under construction. But, even prior to that, they'd always come in, I always vote here. But yeah, maybe for early voting, but never on election day. So they still think that, that even though they don't.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Lori.
All right. Yep. No problem.
All right. Let's move on to our discussion number 6, update on 2023 and 24 strategic plan priorities.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to give you just a brief update on the strategic priorities with the updates I've received on the various work that we've been doing over the last, we'll call it almost a year now. If you recall, back in March of 2023, following a conversation at the last Committee of the Whole retreat in January of last year, the council took the 100-odd action steps that were included in the implementation plan of the strategic plan and picked out a handful that they wanted to have focus on for the remainder of 2023 and then also into 2024. So that is the list of 6 or so items with some bullet points that's included in your packet materials. Again, they're in non-ranked order, but just wanted to give you kind of brief snapshots of the work that's been done. Some of the items we've talked about already today as part of the Committee of the Whole, for example, stormwater position under sustainability. That's one that SWUB is working on as part of the referendum question, and it'd be stormwater 2 positions, depending on how their asset study comes back. And so there'll be more conversation on that item in the coming weeks and months as we near finalizing a question for the November election. In terms of implementing the Sustainable City Plan, there were a couple of initiatives that the council had highlighted as priorities. Working to encourage and enhance the city's public-private partnerships as it related to EV infrastructure. Obviously, through the work of Kelly and others in the city, we've made some good progress with MG&E on planning for some additional charging infrastructure in the community, particularly at the police department and Terrace Avenue. That construction, we don't have a definitive date yet when that's going to start, but we are kind of doing some fine tuning with MG&E on what's necessary for those to happen. In terms of investing in municipal fleet, as you saw in the 2024 budget, we did have the purchase of our first completely electric vehicle. And we have some additional hybrid vehicles and other electric vehicles that are in the 2024 capital budget that we'll be purchasing as we go through the bonding and borrowing process for the capital budget. So as we've mentioned before, those vehicles, because there is some substantial lead time, sometimes when you purchase them, when you put in the final purchase order, it may be the case that the vehicle isn't delivered until after that budget cycle is complete. But it's not unique to Middleton. Everyone's kind of struggling with the same thing, but those items are included in the capital budget. Next, we have the priority of financial capital, and some of the items the council had identified in March of last year were rebranding the business park identity, and one of the suggestions was the potential for sustainability focus. What we've been doing over the last couple of weeks actually is working pretty closely with the Middleton Area Development Corporation and some local brokers, real estate brokers, to take a look at some spaces that are available now as they're getting ready to come on the market and help get the word out about these facilities, particularly to those in the bioscience, life science fields, but also in the sustainability field. There's one company in Middleton called C-Motive that is doing production on a small scale, but they're looking to ramp up of a motor system that doesn't necessarily use petroleum-based solutions for their lubrication. So there's some interesting opportunities in that field that they're trying to break into and are looking for some bigger space to help as they size up their facility. So working with partners in the community to identify those type of businesses that either are in Middleton or are maybe looking at a new space somewhere in the Madison metro area, and helping get the word out about spaces that are available that they could look at relocating to. The business incubator idea, that's been a little bit more challenging because, in part because we don't have necessarily the control to make a project happen. We can be a resource, and in some cases, if it falls within a TIF district, we can provide some financial assistance to make a project happen. But Thus far, we've had conversations with I've had conversations with two different property owners that are in broad strokes thinking of some type of business incubator as it relates to life science, bioscience. But for a host of different reasons, particularly the market, they're not quite ready to do anything at this time. So we'll continue to keep our eyes and ears open and make the connections in the community that make sense to get those projects going. If we move on to social capital and community identity, there was and this is one we had a little bit of discussion at the Committee of Whole in March of 2023, this idea of helping to promote volunteerism or look at the idea of a volunteer portal. Candidly, we've not had much activity on that item yet because we've been focusing our time and attention on some of the other items. This item is a little, if I'd be candid, I'd say it's a little nebulous in terms of what the council wants as an outcome on this item. So if you have any feedback for me and for staff on, what this might mean to you, that will help us figure out how to best align some resources towards it. In addition, we've been looking at one of the things the council's talked about, in addition to the consolidation of committees for efficiency, but also looking at implementing new technologies that will help kind of speed up processes, both for staff, but also for our customers that we serve. We have had a couple of software packages that we've purchased in 23, and there's a couple in 24 that are scheduled for purchase that will help do just that in certain areas. Obviously, not every area of the city can benefit from new technology or new software, but where it makes sense for us to consider it, staff will offer that up as part of the budget process. One of the ones that's on the docket for this year is the Muni Code. That was an item that was funded in the 2024 budget, and we'll look to incorporate that this year. That would allow the city's code to convert from a PDF kind of standalone document to an actual online searchable version, which there are other communities in Dane County that have that system. Stone Horse Green continues to be very successful in terms of the amount of participation in events that we have going around in the community. We're now starting to track our attendance at these events. For example, in April to December, we hosted 38 events with nearly 5,000 attendees, which is great for kind of our first full spring season. And we're continuing to look at ways to raise additional funds for new programming in 2024. So there was a sponsorship letter that is being put together and has been sent out to businesses who may want to help participate. We talked about streamlining committees, and I'll take your direction from this meeting today and see how we can continue to push along those committees that seem most immediate to do consolidations, but then also continue that conversation about community liaisons and other ways to make those committees more efficient. Housing affordability, we've kind of talked about the big one here today already with TIF District number 3 and the options that exist for the city potentially in 2026. So we'll continue to bring this question forward to the council, particularly if you remember one of Bill's last slides in his presentation, there were a couple of questions. Those are policy-based questions that we'll continue to ask the council to weigh in on over the course of 2024 as we start to make some decisions about when to close and what to do and all of those things. And then completion of zoning ordinance. Obviously, the council is very aware of the status of the zoning ordinance. We've got another public hearing that's scheduled for the February 20th council meeting. And then the council can make some decisions on if the zoning ordinance is ready for formal adoption over the next couple of weeks. Communications, our new communications director, started with us last spring and has brought some really great passion and ideas to not only figuring out pathways for communication internally for staff, but also externally. How do we reach different audiences that we haven't reached before? So there's a lot of exciting opportunities that exist for us, not only in social media, but also just generally how we do communication, both internally and externally. So we'll continue to work on that. And then lastly, the council had looked at the idea of potentially a monthly news summary, maybe like an e-newsletter that other communities do. I think that's still a possibility. However, I think the new idea with the weekly AI spokesperson kind of short snippet idea that Brent put together, I think is a really unique and interesting idea. And I kind of want to play that out a little bit further and see what the community reaction is to something that's more timely than a monthly e-newsletter that takes quite a bit of time to put together. And then, sometimes by the time you get it, the information might not be as current. So with the council's patience and grace, maybe we'll revisit the e-newsletter idea in a couple months after we've got some more feedback on the AI option. And then lastly, on the Civic Campus plan, we are working with our architecture team to help get them to put together an amended scope of work for us to delineate what are the other additional steps that needed to happen with that project to get the council to a level of comfort to answer some questions about where we go. And by that, I mean, where we left things a few months ago, we have a pre-COVID-19 cost estimate of what a couple new construction options would be. What we didn't do in 2019 that the council thought would be useful is to figure out what a retrofit or substantial retrofit of the 3 existing buildings as they sit geographically today would look like. And in order to answer some of those questions, we have to update some of the space needs studies. We have to do a fairly enhanced mechanical study of our facilities as they exist today, so we know what the systems are, whether they're useful lives, what needs to be replaced if we were going to do a retrofit option. And then there's some other things that are incorporated in that. So as soon as we have that scope of work in a place that's ready for council discussion, we'll likely schedule another committee of the whole meeting so that the council has some time to sit with that and ask questions, and then we can get some direction from council on, do you want us to proceed with this? And we'll have some options for funding for that work. So that'll be an item that'll be forthcoming in the coming months. So that's a quick high-level overview of those kind of 6 main priorities from March of 2023. As we mentioned throughout the course of this whole discussion with the strategic plan, just because we've highlighted these 6 items, that doesn't mean those are the only things that staff is working on. As you know, over the course of any day, week, month, staff is working on a whole host of different things, and there's daily operations things that need to be done. There's work that's being done to move along some of the other plans that we have. But the reason that we asked council to, identify these priorities so that they could give staff some guidance on, here are the main level things out of that list of 100 that we want you to focus on. And as time, attention, and resources are available, those other 100 odd priorities, we'll make it, progress on them as we can. But our focuses are on these main 6 things to begin with. One of the other things I'd like to do in the coming weeks is spend some time with staff, department heads, to get their perspective, not only on the larger list of priorities, but also one of the things that was left as an outstanding question with the strategic plan was the metrics that we use to determine whether or not we've made progress on some of the particular 100 odd items. Some of those metrics make sense for some of those items. Other ones, I think the metric is probably not appropriate, or it's not a way that we are able to capture data to make it measurable. And so I'd like to get perspective from staff on, are there better metrics that show, not necessarily just output type metrics, but metrics that show, that actual progress is being made. And so folds into a much larger conversation that we're having on a department head level about this idea of kind of a high performance organization framework, or a Baldrige organization framework. It's something that is done on a national level, and we're using that to really get a perspective of what is the organization of the community and what is the value proposition that we provide. So that's a long way of saying that there's a lot of additional conversation and discussion that department heads are having to help figure out, establish what we do and how we measure the work that we do. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments that you might have. One last comment, there will be additional updates on the strategic plan as we move along in 2024, but I just wanted to provide you this quick snapshot here as part of your committee of the whole meeting today.
Any questions?
I just have a procedural one. Is the plan or the thought that because these were the goals for 2024, they would be done by the end of this year, kind of thing? Like the metrics will have whatever metric you're using to describe them will be met. And then into next year, a whole new set of priorities would be considered?
It depends. It's a great question. Like for some of the projects that we don't have necessarily 100% control over, like, for example, the business incubator, there may be priorities on this list that we make some progress towards, but we don't complete. And then it's up to the council to decide as we get towards the end of 2024, we'll have another conversation like this where the council will look at that list of 100, they'll look at this list of 6 and say, okay, we've completed 4 of the 6, or, we're nearly completion of 4 of the 6. And so we want to add 4 new items from that list of 100 to a new list that will carry us through 2025 or whatever the time frame the council chooses. So it will be part of a continual conversation, probably at least an annual, if not, twice a year or 2-year basis.
Clearly, like 1B doesn't happen in 2 years. Your sustainability things.
Yeah, I mean,
suddenly revamp your whole infrastructure.
Yeah. And so again, it's just more, some items are more discrete where you can absolutely have, for example, 1A, the stormwater management positions, depending on the outcome of the referendum question and how it's structured, we will know whether or not that can be completed or not. But to Alder Schaefer's point, there are going to be other ones where it's more qualitative rather than quantitative.
Maybe it's a process of, well, at least that EV infrastructure program is underway. You can move it off as a central focus.
Yeah, it just becomes
and it just becomes
Yep.
Great. Anybody else?
Well, on that particular one about the EV, electrifying the fleet, I would love to hear from the Sustainability Committee on their recommendations for how to do that. Specifically, things like expanding beyond our focus on Ford. Also, this isn't electrifying, but it's cleaning the fleet to use biofuels. I think that's a project that they're considering. And then also maybe participating in the state purchasing, or there are other purchasing collaboratives out there. So I don't know if the committee's been asked to provide some ideas, but maybe a presentation on that could be good. Using technology, and maybe this is something that'll have to wait until later in the year to even suggest, but I'm super happy about Muni Code, of course. I would love to see us get some kind of project tracking software like what Madison uses to keep track of all of its developments. Because as a member of the Planning Commission, there are SIPs and GDP, I mean, there's all kinds of acronyms, plats, and there's no one place. I'm sure the staff internally has folders they can go to, but I can't go to a place and be like, what was the latest update that we had on that, or where's an amendment? And Madison has a really nice system where, like, just on their website, you can follow the progress of any building project and actually see the documents. So if we can't, roll that into the use of technology now, I'm definitely going to bring it up later this year.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think that's a good conversation for as we get into the budget conversation for 2025. Specific to the Madison example, I did look into that one. That's a little different because that's an in-house created system. So there's not something off the shelf that we can buy and apply here. It sounds like it was pretty labor intensive for them to set up. Whether or not, I don't know that they could design one for us, but that's something we can take a look at as we get into the budget cycle.
Okay. And then also I wanted to mention or ask about the new TID, thinking ahead to TID closure and creating a new one in business, not business incubation, but rebranding the business park. Could we open a TID for blight elimination when the time comes? Could we open a TID for blight elimination and require as part of our policy for that district that no projects would receive funding unless they were like net zero buildings?
Yeah, I think that you could establish a TID for blight elimination following the state parameters. And then I think, as far as where you're going to target funding within that TID, that would be a policy choice for the governing body, putting in the project plan and your own policies for that TID. So I think if you're providing assistance, you have more flexibility in establishing your own rules of where you want to target that assistance, as long as it falls within the umbrella of what's allowed by state statute.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Anything else? All right. Moving out of discussion items into future agenda items. Number one under that title is or that heading is potential agenda items for future COW meetings, committee of the whole meetings. Some of the things that I've worked on with the VP of the council are a primer on council meetings, council meeting 101. What are the proper steps in getting an agenda item on the agenda? What is the difference between a resolution and proclamation and an ordinance, et cetera? So that's one we would like to see in the future. Traffic calming policy is huge for a lot of us. As alders, we deal with it. And the civic campus plan. Off the top of your head, do you have any other ideas that you want to throw at me right now? Otherwise, feel free to just email me ideas for future committee of the whole, things you want to take a deep dive on, like we did today. We workshop stuff, and if there are things that you're throughout your time on the council have said, I've never really understood how this works. Can we discuss it? So that's what I want you to let me know, and we can put it on the agenda for
You
future.
want us to contact you, or are you looking for ideas now?
If you've got one right off your top of your
Yeah,
head.
I have met with a number of constituents, and this, what I think I would call a livability quotient for the city, the ability that a lot of people are concerned that there's literally no way to go buy food without getting in a vehicle. We put in all these developments, and we put in clusters of retail, et cetera, but I don't know that we have any mechanism that can push or promote towards people to say, what we need is a little grocery store, a little something here. But it's particularly in my district, it's very frustrating. And so I'd like to get everybody's opinion as a whole on that sort of livability issues in zoning practice.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh, you've got one too. Okay, great.
Well, it's sort of like a step back from Alder Schaefer's suggestion, and that is when you hear from constituents about something, because I get a lot of suggestions from people, why don't we do X? And there are some things that I'm like, well, I'm not going to get it on a council agenda. I wouldn't even know how to get it, even if we go through the putting together a council meeting. I wouldn't know how to classify it. So I wonder if there can be a segment of our next committee of the whole meeting where we can bring ideas that we've heard from constituents, gauge whether anyone else is hearing about this or thinks this might have legs, and then figure out this is something we want to try to implement. So let's put that on a future.
It's a great idea. Great idea. Anybody else? All right, and with nothing else, I am going to adjourn this committee of the whole. I want to thank the staff for hanging out with us today.
Yay, staff.
I want to thank Ryan for putting together the agenda. I want to thank Bill for the fabulous presentation, and Eric and Kurt. And thank you all for taking time out of your Friday afternoon. And